Thanks for joining us on Capitol View. I'm Fred Martino. It's been an extremely busy few weeks in Illinois politics. There was stunning news about the influx of migrants in Chicago, and legislators are expected to use the veto session this month to update gun safety laws again. We have those stories and much more this week with our analyst. Jason Piscia is director of the Public Affairs Reporting Program at the University of Illinois Springfield, and Kent Redfield is an emeritus professor, political science professor from that institution. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us.
Good to be here.
Jason, I want to start with the veto session. Columnist Rich Miller reports Governor J.B. Pritzker and House Speaker Chris Welch are both indicating Chicago should not expect a veto session appropriations bill to help the city handle the increasing influx of asylum seekers. Columnist Rich Miller wrote, quote, allocating or reallocating money to help asylum seekers only validates complaints by Black and Latino political leaders, including legislators, that their own constituents are being shortchanged by state government in favor of the new arrivals, end quote. Your thoughts?
Sure, thanks. The veto session, first of all, just for some basic knowledge, is, that 2-week session here in the fall where, with the word veto session in it, sort of indicates that, lawmakers are coming back to consider any vetoes that the governor did over the summer. But traditionally that's usually the very least of the lawmakers' worries when they come back. They're usually coming back to try to deal with some emerging issue that's hot in the news that needs something that needs some attention from the legislature. As a result, the migrant issue around Illinois, especially in Chicago, is especially relevant right now. There's a lot of people talking about what should the state be doing to help this situation with the busloads of migrants coming in from Texas and other states into Chicago. Mayor Brandon Johnson in Chicago has indicated his city needs some help. That's where most of the migrants are coming into. And if we look at the calendar, winter is coming. The cold weather is coming, and Chicago is not a friendly place in the winter when it comes to the weather. So there are some worries about how the city is going to be able to handle this, what's becoming a humanitarian crisis in some ways. And there was some efforts by him to convince state lawmakers and state officials to throw some extra money his way to help his city deal with this issue. As you mentioned, the governor and the speaker have both indicated that we're not going to be talking about migrant funding during the veto session. A lot of people are saying, there's already, the state has already, invested millions, $330 million up to $500 million so far to help deal with the migrant crisis throughout the state. As a result, we're not expected to see anything more to come out during the veto session. And as Rich's column did mention, this is a touchy political issue. One reason that always gets thrown around is, we're close to an election season, and specifically we're right in the middle of a petition passing time where candidates are going door to door seeking signatures to get their names on the ballot. There is some worry that if lawmakers take a controversial vote dealing with migrant funding or anything related to this, that some angry opponent will come out of the woodwork and run against them.
Let's follow up on that, Jason. I mean, give us a sense of how this might shape the political landscape, not only in Chicago, but really statewide, with reporting from the Chicago Tribune that indicated, as you mentioned, Illinois has spent nearly $330 million on relief due to this influx of migrants.
Yeah, it's the state has a lot of financial challenges on its hands, and I'm not sure the average Illinois citizen is able to differentiate about the seriousness of what's happening on the home front with the seriousness of what's happening with the migrants coming into Illinois. So I think there's a certain as Rich's column mentioned, the African American and Latino caucuses and voters feel that a lot of these funds should be going to help their communities in Illinois.
And it should be mentioned, there is no question, and I have seen no coverage of folks saying that something shouldn't be done. Everyone seems to agree something needs to be done. We must provide help, but the separate question is who pays for it? And that's a different question because, as you know, and the governor has asked this directly to President Biden, the federal government, the statement is, needs to step up here.
Sure. I mean, yeah, with the way the migrant, the moving of these people like cargo from one state to another, it's making a huge burden on states like Illinois. And as you mentioned, Governor Pritzker did write a letter to President Biden about the federal government needs to step up on this and help states with this issue. It shouldn't be falling completely to the states. And I think that's part of also the political reason why we're not going to be dealing with this issue on the state level during the veto session.
Yeah. All right. Well, following up on this, Kent, very, very important to mention, and this is a story that was missed by many news organizations. The Chicago Sun-Times reporting, you might call stunning. It turns out the federal government has been helping to pay for the relocation of migrants to Chicago. The Sun-Times reports Catholic Charities has been using FEMA money to fly them here from Texas. The Sun-Times writes that the plane tickets are paid for using funds from the Federal Emergency Management Agency. The nonprofit Catholic Charities has been awarded $48 million through FEMA's Emergency Food and Shelter Program since December. That compared to only about $7 million awarded to Chicago, according to FEMA. Thoughts on this, Kent? It would seem that when you think this issue couldn't get any more explosive, it actually does.
This is almost where to start. I mean, we're talking about a federal grant program. The allocations go to the states that have, are on the border, that are dealing with, people that are, and we have to clarify, a lot of these are people who are making asylum claims, and the federal law says, you can make an asylum claim and you can remain in the U.S. while that claim is being processed. So we haven't clarified or done anything really with the federal law. We dealt with executive orders rather than legislative action because of this paralyzes Congress. It's a better issue. Then solving of the problem is not nearly as good a thing to run on these days as just having that issue out there. So, it's not entirely clear that this is a proper use of the funds that have been allocated, but it's almost a question of, no one really being in charge. And so when we start with the federal level, that just, you get this situation, which is putting more pressure on Chicago.
And according to the reporting in the Sun-Times, there was no coordination with Chicago. It was just flights are coming in, which you might argue makes it, I carefully use a word like stunning, but in this case, some would say stunning because this was emergency food and shelter, according to the reporting. Well, how do you pay to have someone get on a plane not knowing if they're going to have shelter? If there's no coordination, how do you know?
No, and this is just the similar situation exists with buses that show up at all hours unannounced. So there's no coordination. This whole thing should be, there should be a national policy that we agree on, that states can operate with in a context. But by the time you investigate how a grant is being spent or try to say, well, we really ought to clarify this in Congress, good luck these days with no Speaker of the House and total gridlock. And so it just becomes a metaphor for the whole of how badly we are mishandling immigration.
Kent, I have to ask you this because you spent your career as a political science professor. And as I was thinking about doing this show today, and then on Sunday watching 60 Minutes on CBS and seeing another story about how Florida was involved in paying for flights of people to Martha's Vineyard who were not even in Florida, who were in another state, who they were paying to find people who were willing to go and get on, and they're being accused of deceiving those people. It occurred to me that, and I don't know, I want your reaction from someone who taught and studied political science. We keep saying this since the Trump era. We are in such uncharted territory. There are things happening here that are so off the charts, and there really isn't the context sometimes to say that, to say this is just completely bonkers is a good word for it.
Well, we have chaos in terms of how we're dealing with immigration, and that makes it very difficult for people who really want to solve problems and to move forward, get some type of rational strategy and balance in what we're doing. But the chaos also creates opportunities for people to do political posturing, position taking, kinds of activities that have an impact in terms of, politics and political campaigns, but have no real impact on dealing with the problem. And so, and if you don't have, either administratively or in terms of the federal government exercising, legislation in coordination with the executive branch, then the states are left to fend for themselves. And we've got a real problem in terms of Illinois. The governor does, because I don't think that the mayor and the Chicago City Council's handling of the issue is very encouraging. The governor doesn't want to, take responsibility, wear the jacket for all of this. On the other hand, you really don't want either chaos or the national media spending a lot of time writing stories about tent cities in Chicago when the Democrats are trying to hold a national convention. And so, unfortunately, some of this gets down to, what's not only what's good policy, but what's good political optics. And so the legislature is not going to act between now and when they get back in January, really now until March when they get through the primary. That leaves it up to the governor. And, he is going to have to exercise leadership within his limited ability, to do things. These are staggering sums to John Q. Citizen. Well, we're dealing with the $50 billion state budget. Now, there's all kinds of money in there. And so, these are, in context, these are not huge sums, but when we're operating on the margins of not being able to meet obligations schools, mental health, care of children, then it's one more thing that no one needs either politically or in terms of trying to provide services for the citizens of Illinois.
Yes,
That immigration is such a mess.
it is, and of course, as you referenced, in 2024, the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. So, a lot of people are talking about that and questioning and wondering about what the stories will be outside that convention, and this is one of them that there is concern about. I need to move on. Jason, we move to another issue for the veto session. It's another attempt at strengthening gun safety laws. Tell us about this.
We mentioned, earlier that it seems like the state legislature might not want to take up any overly political, overly hot issues during the veto session to give themselves some political cover. But this is one that might get some traction. So there was a bill that the House considered in the spring that would require law enforcement to take away guns from people who have orders of protection taken out against them. If you are, a domestic violence victim, you can seek an order of protection from the person who is accused of abusing you. One of the remedies within that order of protection is you can ask law enforcement to take away the firearms that belong to that alleged abuser. The way the law works now, the removal of those firearms is somewhat inconsistent. And we saw that happen tragically over the summer. We mentioned that this bill passed the House in May. Within a few weeks later, there was a tragic case in Chicago where a woman took out an order of protection against an alleged abuser. He came back and shot the woman and two of her kids, and the woman and one of the teen children died tragically. So this bill has some extra motivation behind it as we go into the veto session. The lawmaker who is putting the bill forward wants to make it more clear that law enforcement does need to get in there within 2 days and physically confiscate those guns. As I mentioned, the process of doing that now has been sort of inconsistent. There's been cases where the guns have been relinquished, but they've been relinquished to someone who lives in the same home as the alleged abuser. So the effectiveness of that is very limited. And there's been other cases where there's been miscommunication between law enforcement agencies. This bill seeks to make it very clear. Law enforcement needs to get in there and get those firearms out of the home and away from the person. There are some questions about how this will all work in real life. The Illinois State Police theoretically will sort of oversee all this, but they'll need to work with local law enforcement to actually get into those homes. And then what happens to the guns themselves? Who stores them? Who's responsible for them? What's the process for getting them back, if there is such a process?
Yeah.
So still a lot of questions to be answered.
Laws only matter when you have enforcement of the laws. So that's great context, but it'll be very interesting to see. It seems like this is on track for passage. We'll update and watch it. I do need to move on. Kent, some economic news now. That is good news for Illinois. I'm glad we have some good news to talk about here. Federal money will help the state develop hydrogen technology. Columnist Rich Miller wrote about this. Tell us more.
Well, this is part of the larger infrastructure bill passed by Congress, and there's money in there for a number of initiatives involving trying to develop green energy, reduce carbon, and so this idea of extracting hydrogen as an energy source, and occasionally you'll see things on the news about vehicles that are being cars, trucks that are being run on hydrogen, and so we've got 7 centers, areas where are set up. Illinois is in one of those areas, seems to have maybe more of the lead in that, where you've got, potentially $1 billion worth of spending that's going to take place.
Yeah, and I should say, Ken, for folks who are not familiar with this isn't just a hypothetical. In other words, just like we have electric cars now that are getting more and more popular, while it's a very tiny percentage of the market, and mostly in California, which has, nation-leading environmental laws, Toyota, as an example, has been a leader in developing hydrogen technology, and there are cars driving on the road as we speak in California that are powered by hydrogen. So, it is another possible tool in the toolbox. I think the big question is, though, we're struggling now to figure out speeding up building the electric infrastructure. How do we at the same time think about building up another infrastructure for hydrogen pumps? But nevertheless, it's one more tool in the toolbox, and it's not only for cars. So that context is important too. So we'll just see where this goes. Final thought before we move on.
Always these things always with an asterisk, because you've got to make it work. You're talking about dealing with state and local governments.
Oh yeah.
You don't know how stable things are at the federal government, and then the technology has to compete. And and sometimes what looks great on paper doesn't end up to be the alternative that you thought. So this is investment. It's good to have, but nothing is guaranteed, particularly as we move towards alternative energy.
You didn't intend it for it to be a segue, but you gave me, Kent, a wonderful segue, not guaranteed there. For our final few minutes, Jason, meantime, there is another clean energy project with a big setback. We've been talking about this for years. It's that carbon dioxide pipeline in Illinois and elsewhere in the Midwest. A big setback here. Tell us about that. Give us an update.
Yeah, the company that is planning that pipeline, it was set to sort of span 1,300 miles across 5 different states to transport carbon dioxide from different states, and actually the termination of it would be right here in central Illinois, where I sit today. But that company withdrew that permit application just amid they've been getting raked over the coals from environmentalists and landowners and farmers about the safety of this project and how effective it is in doing what it intends to do. So we don't know where this project stands at this point. This company's also pulled its permits back in Iowa, which is actually the state where it sort of winds its way through the most out of all the 5 states involved. But when this did happen not too long ago, or the beginning of 2023, the same company withdrew its permit applications here in Illinois, but then refiled them just a few weeks later. So I'm guessing this isn't a full abandonment of the project, but it is a setback and kind of is, at this point at least, a temporary win for the opponents to this project, who are concerned that there's this underground storage pipes and facilities are coming right underneath their homes and their farms.
Yeah. All right. Very quickly, Kent, we're running out of time, but I want to move to education. Capital News Illinois looked at a report on the state's educators, and it appears a labor shortage continues.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have overall numbers. How many vacancies do you have? How are you able to cover the classrooms? But the overall numbers are not bad. In comparison to pre-pandemic kinds of indices. When you get down into the details, then are you covering spots with a lot of substitute teachers? how much continuity you have in the classroom. Do you have teachers with temporary qualifications? And then, there's a lot of polling that would indicate a lot of dissatisfaction with the current, people that are teaching, that are, looking, for an early exit. And so you don't know how stable your base is. There's a lot of uncertainty there in terms of, our ability to staff classrooms. And so it's just one more problem in, a very complex situation that we have in Illinois, fiscally and politically at this point.
Yep, and it's another one, as there are so many, a national issue as well. Shortages of educators, not just teachers, by the way, across the country in a variety of states. I want to thank my guests. Jason Piscia, Director of the Public Affairs Reporting Program at the University of Illinois, Springfield, and Kent Redfield. He's an Emeritus Political Science Professor from that institution. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
Spirited show today. Thank you for joining us at home. For everyone at WSIU, I'm Fred Martino. I will be back next month. Jack Titchener will be filling in for me on CapitolView for the next 2 weeks. With the news this past couple of weeks, I'm glad I have a fill-in. He'll also host a special Friday edition of Illinois Lawmakers on November 10th. Hope you have a great week.